Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second International Conference of Video Game Studies. This year, the Academy of Arts in Novi Sad is organizing the conference in collaboration with the Faculty of Philology from Belgrade and the Serbian Gaming Association. The SGA, with its Supercluster project Creative Tech Serbia, secured the funds for the conference from donors, USAID, Serbia Innovates and ICT Hub, and thus made it possible for the conference to take place. Now, I kindly ask Professor Siniša Bokan, Dean of the Academy of Arts Novi Sad, to open the conference, and after him, Professor Manuel Marević, SVI Conference Manager.
Thank you. Dear attendees of the conference, welcome to the University of Novi Sad, to the event which is organized by the Academy of Arts Novi Sad, with the partners, partner institutions, Serbian Gaming Association and Faculty of Philology from Belgrade. I would like to welcome and to tell my experience organizing these conferences. The first conferences when we organized, that was dedicated to the phenomenon of inventing game studies within universities, and it was dedicated to explore these possibilities, how the concept of gaming fit in the academical studies. So this was the pioneer days, and now we get to this moment when we have all the diversity of these subjects which are proposed in these speeches and these as subjects of this conference. So I'm delighted that we make this progress and that we can now talk about game design and about the game itself as not just as a phenomenon which is for the young generation, but also for the useful tool in many disciplines. Also, I would like to say that we would consider this program as a potential to develop, to interfere with other disciplines. And with the Academy of Arts in Novi Sad, we have now experience of 5 years in gaming academic studies, so it's nice that we can also make some conclusions about studies itself and about interference with other disciplines within the Academy of Arts. I was the initiator, founder of these studies together with colleagues Manuel Marević, and together with colleagues. At first we have problems, but we have also a huge push. I want to thank to Professor Mladen Čuganov, who is also attending of this conference, who gave us also energy to establish these studies. So we are trying to make this as a recognizable within a region, not just only within the academy, and with the experience we have, for sure we can have many partners in the future. Also, important fact that Novi Sad is the center of the gaming industry gives us push to see how the education and the company business can make relations and can make to get a future. And we think that we are doing a great job with this within the Academy of Arts, because we have game creators who are open-minded and who can adjust to any circumstances in the future. Considering the technology and the speed of technology innovations in the field of gaming, we must be open to the future to respond to these changes that technology can bring. Considering, for example, the fact that artificial intelligence is influencing many disciplines, and it comes to influence design, and it comes to influence many disciplines, for sure it will influence also gaming industry. So let's consider this as this conference as a potential to sit and talk about the future of the gaming industry. Welcome to University of Novi Sad, and I pronounce this conference now open. Thank you.
Dear students of video game design, respected dean, esteemed guests, and participants, welcome to the University of Novi Sad and the second SVI conference. When we planned our first scientific assembly last year, the idea was that it would be national to gain insight into how many scholars in Serbia are interested in studying video games. We decided to take a risk, and instead of a round table, which would have gathered a few people I knew who had written about games, we opted for a larger gathering. Eventually, we ended up with the first National Conference of Video Game Studies. It turned out to be the right decision. And not only were we surprised by the great interest in the conference, but also by the fact that we had received a large number of applications from our citizens who worked or studied at the universities or scientific institutes in the USA, China, Germany, UK, the Czech Republic, Finland, and Russia. So, from the very beginning, the National Conference became a national conference with international participation. This encouraged us to organize a full-format international scientific conference this year. I'm glad that in this part of the world, in the Western Balkan region, a community of video game researchers is finally being created. For, in addition to the SVR conference, our friends and colleagues from the University of Zagreb from Croatia have also organized an international conference this year. I hope that this trend will continue and expand to other countries of our region, as well as that in the future we will expand both our mutual collaboration and cooperation with researchers around the world. Last year, we celebrated 20 years of game studies, taking 2001 as the beginning of this new interdisciplinary field. This year, we celebrate another significant anniversary, 50 years of the video game industry. It's been exactly 5 decades since the first video game company, Atari, was founded in Sunnyvale, California in 1972, making a huge success that very year with its arcade game phone. In the same year, of course, Magnum's Odyssey, the first game console, was released. Half a century later, every school child knows that the video game industry is making higher profits than the music and film industries. In addition to that economic importance, let's ask ourselves how much cultural and social impact video games have today when they are played by almost 3 billion people worldwide. What meanings can we discover in the textual analysis of the game? What is the relationship between video games and art? What are educational and therapeutical potentials of serious games? What is the future of video game criticism? Where are the meeting points of the industry on the one hand and social sciences and humanities on the other? How can these sciences contribute to making the gaming industry not only an important economic sector, but also a more humane and attractive place for young people? How can the video game industry remain a place of forever young employees and at the same time manage to keep seasoned veterans in the business? It seems that it's still necessary to repeat constantly that video games are not toys but a medium, and as such a relevant subject of scientific study. I'm glad that more and more people in the Serbia gaming industry understand this, and that strong connection have already been made with education. The link that has been missing so far is the industry's connection with science, especially with social sciences and humanities. Both the industry and academia need to overcome certain prejudices they hold about each other. People from the industry should know that they are cultural workers who, in addition to making a profit, also create cultural artifacts and thus influence the socialization and creation of worldview of millions of people. This is something that the social sciences and humanities can recognize and study. However, the researchers who are at this conference and who write scientific papers about video games are aware of this, of course, but I'm not sure how acceptable this idea is to our wider scientific community, at least here in Serbia. I'm not sure if other scholars are convinced that video games are not merely trivial consumer products that destroy culture or disrupt social relations, and the study of video games and gaming can go beyond pointing out problems of addiction, incitement to violence, poor school performance, dangers to physical and mental health. I'm, on the other hand, convinced that this conference is the right step to show our colleagues that video games can be considered from various angles. This does not mean that we take a celebratory position, but rather that we strive to approach the study of video games, the act of playing, the players, and the social and cultural contacts without prejudice. To answer why it is important for scientific institutions to see video games beyond the stereotype of light entertainment, I will recall the early days of filmmaking. Back then, to be accepted as a respectable art form and not just a mere spectacle for the masses, the development of specific film language, such as camera shooting, editing techniques, and so on, was not enough. But this effort had to be supported by theoretical and critical discourses. As the American art historian Arthur Danto said, the world of art, which is made up of cultural and scientific institutions, represented by theorists, curators, critics, and even artists themselves, determines whether something is art or not. I'm convinced that this is the path video games will also take, and that scholars will make a key contribution in providing a broader perspective and a more thorough understanding of this aesthetically and technologically very complex medium. And finally, I'd like to reveal a little secret to our dear guests from Finland, Switzerland, Israel, the USA, China, Italy, Sweden, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Thailand, the UK, Turkey, France, and Austria. You may be wondering why the acronym of the conference is SVI and not VGS, as in video game studies. The simple reason is that the conference, as I said, was originally conceived as a national conference, and in Serbia it was called STUDIJE with IGARA. In addition, the acronym SVI, or in Serbian, SVI, as a whole word means all, like all the people, or everybody. In this sense, the main idea of our conference is to gather and connect researchers, to exchange knowledge and build up contacts. I wish all our guests a pleasant stay in Novi Sad and successful work at today's in-person sessions and online sessions tomorrow. And above all, good socializing and communication. Thank you very much. And now, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Olli Sotama, a professor at the University of Tampere in Finland and one of the editors of Game Production Studies, the publication that inspired the theme of this year's SVI conference. The floor is yours, Olli.
my first time in Serbia, and when I was on my way here, still in Finland, I got a message that my flights were cancelled. And I was sort of like thinking about, okay, I was sort of like looking forward to that, but who knows? And I got rebooked in 30 minutes, and here I am. So, and I've already learned a bit about the local game research scene and the game industry. And sort of like during today and tomorrow, I'm looking forward to learn much more. So really excited to be here today. This is in short what I'm going to talk about today. So first we'll start. I already mentioned the book we published last year. So I will sort of like quickly talk a bit about like what is game production studies, why we need it, and how it's sort of like connected or located in the field of game studies or studies of how it's connected to the study of game culture. Then I will quickly run through a couple of case studies. These are sort of like projects we're working on right now. And I hope that together they sort of like illustrate some of the ways in which game production studies is done in practice or can be done in practice. And then I'll finally sort of like quickly conclude and highlight a few things that I feel is important to take into account when we're moving on in this field. So let's go to straight to the point. What is game production studies? We published a book which is well, as this very title sort of like should be able to explain you what it means. This is, by the way, the whole book is available in open access via Amsterdam University Press. So feel free to download the PDF. But in the introduction, we highlight how game production studies is a sort of like a specific perspective on the sort of like cultural, economic, political, social aspects, I believe, of game making. And so instead of being a sort of like an autonomous discipline or sort of like a single methodology, it's more of a sort of like a research field or maybe a research approach. So it's sort of like it's studies for a reason. It's a plural. It's many things. So why we then need game production studies? I think to me, at least, the sort of like the motivation comes from two different directions. There probably can be more arguments on behalf. I'm happy to hear your arguments during the following couple of days. But I'm like, to start with, I think there's the sort of like the academic relevance for this kind of research is sort of like raises from the relative lack of attention in media and cultural studies towards the digital game industry. And then at the same time, the sort of like the lack of attention in game studies to production and circulation issues. And this is something like Afra in her book Global Games already highlighted a few years ago really nicely. Secondly, there's a sort of like the societal relevance of this sort of work is related to the sort of like the ramifications this kind of research can have on things like government funding models, game development, education programs, possibly the sort of like the canonization of particular kinds of game cultures, player cultures, and so on, as highlighted, for example, by friend and Keo. So since 2018, we've had an Academy of Finland-funded Center of Excellence in Game Culture Studies, which is it's a collaboration between 3 different universities in Finland, but it's coordinated in Tampere. And so for sort of like a multidisciplinary understanding of game cultures, we created this simple model that sort of like highlights at least the sort of like key aspects of game culture for us. This is also sort of like our main themes. I'm the sort of like the PI for the creation and production of games, but then we have other professors responsible for the other areas here. And from the beginning, and this is sort of like different from some of the prior ways of trying to understand what is game culture, we wanted to include the sort of like the creation and production of games here. As you can see, the model not only introduces the sort of like the key aspects of game culture, but it also tries to highlight that they're interconnected. There's interplay between these areas. So if you, for example, look at from the game production perspective, I think the lesson here is that we should always sort of like try to think about the connections between the 4 areas. So how other aspects are visible in production, how players, how the societal frames, how our ideas of what is the sort of like the meaning of games is sort of like present in the production phase of games. And then also like how production is embedded in the other moments of the service, how it's sort of like interacting with the other sort of like moments in the sort of like the life cycle of a game. And then, well, from here on, I'll just like directly move to the first case study. Some of you may remember this sort of like, I guess from today's perspective, a funny looking gadget. So this is Nokia N-Gage that was launched in October 2003. So almost 20 years ago. This is, in the past couple of years, we've been sort of like looking at this phenomenon, trying to understand what's it about and how it's sort of like, it is relevant in so many ways, but sort of like trying to sort of like tackle from different perspectives. And sort of this is work that we've conducted with my colleagues Tom Apperley and Nick and in order to understand N-Gage, it's sort of like important to understand that at the turn of the millennium, Nokia was very central to Finland's economy. Finland had never had such a sort of like a global company that had their headquarters in Helsinki, and sort of like Nokia dominated the mobile market at the time. They saw that the sort of like the future markets were in multimedia. So for them this meant cameras, music, and games. And if we think about sort of like today's communication culture, we can say that they actually got many things right, but still they didn't get the N-Gage right. Or at least, like, if you look at the sort of like the sort of like the listings of sort of like major IT failures of the past decades, N-Gage is often it often makes these lists. And if we look at the sort of like the artifact and look at the sort of like the feedback received, it is sort of like fairly easy to understand why this is. There is some sort of like major technical challenges. They wanted to build the phone still on the sort of like the existing sort of like pipeline, which they were making multimedia phones, and this ended up sort of like, or the effect was, for example, that you actually had to take the battery out when changing the game. Which, I mean, to anyone who was sort of like knowledgeable about current day sort of like handhelds, like Nintendo DS or anything like that, could even say that, hey, you know what, that sort of like doesn't make any sense. But they sort of like knew it, but then, yeah, games was still like a sort of like a small thing in the huge Nokia empire. So that's the way it was going. It was then that they were able to figure out ways to change this in the later installments of the N-Gage. But then it was, we could now say that it was too late for that. We can also see that there was a sort of like a major design failure. So when you're sort of like using it as a phone, you had to hold it sideways. You can see it in the picture, and like this sort of like users started to make fun of this. It became a sort of like an early internet meme, a sort of like a taco phone sort of thing. You can still find it is pretty hilarious. But it was not only it was a technical failure and a design failure, it was also sort of like a business failure. Nokia wanted to rush the device to the market, and they had almost no games available at the time of the launch, which once again, like for anyone launching sort of like new gadget consoles, knowledgeable enough about the games market would say that no, that once again doesn't make any sense. But there's at least like one more aspect of this. Nokia didn't understand the sort of like the rapidly changing demographics of users. They didn't sort of like understand the need for more inclusive approaches to game design and marketing. They were still sort of like, they went for the sort of like edgy, like half toxic marketing, addressing the sort of like a very limited hardcore gamer, male audience. And this way sort of like diminished the potential audience from the start. So not like something, a sort of like a project that Finns or Finnish game industry representatives would be sort of like directly very proud of these days. But the interesting thing is, okay, now I should get yeah, there we go. And then I'm not getting my notes. Sorry about this. And there we go. So Nokia obviously sort of like misunderstood who wants to play mobile games. But at the same time, interestingly, N-Gage provided opportunities for the local game companies. Overall, Nokia's success at the time was facilitated by significant state investments in R&D, telecommunication infrastructure, tailored education, you name it. And the company, of course, forerunner for many Finnish companies, sort of like opening doors for an international market. Also sort of like developing or forcing Finland to develop into sort of like national innovation system and so on. The sort of like the history of European video game industry is such that it's almost never really been supported by significant local hardware platforms or major publishers. But for a short moment in time, in the early 2000s, Finnish developers who were sort of like used to this sort of time-consuming, how do we get access to publishers and distributors, were actually in a position where they had a sort of like a publisher just next door. And well, maybe we'll move on to my next slide. And I'm still not getting my notes. So the path from sort of like the early mobile games to the sort of like the globally recognized success stories of the past decade or so is obviously sort of like far from straightforward. However, it's sort of like worth noticing that many of the key people who were sort of like exploring the possibilities of mobile games years before the launch of the iPhone and the App Store, or that there were quite a lot of people. And this is nice to illustrate. I found this just like some time ago, a few years ago, an article from 2005. This is a sort of like a story of Sumeo, which is one of the mobile game companies that was originally launched already in 1999. And in the pictures, we can see the members of the team. There's up there, there's Ilkka Paananen, who's currently the CEO of Supercell. So behind games like Clash of Clans and Brawl Stars. And then there's also Jami Laes, who served as an executive vice president of Rovio, who's behind Angry Birds and other games like that. And then there's also Petri Ikonen, who then became a creative director at EA's mobile studio in Helsinki. So these people were already sort of like exploring the possibilities of mobile games, like years before the launch of the sort of like the ecosystems that we sort of like these days associate with mobile games. So obviously there's no like straightforward line saying that, hey, because of Nokia, this is what we got. But we can see that the sort of like, they were probably better prepared, had a better chance to succeed than developers in some other regions in the world. And now I'm not able to change the slides. And now I am. One more thing about this. This project on the N-Gage is a collaboration between us and the Finnish Museum of Games. So in addition to our academic papers, we're also preparing an exhibition which is titled Fantastic Failure. And if you listen to what I said, you may understand why we came up with such a name. And this is due to open in October 2023, so exactly 20 years after the launch of the N-Gage. And it's been really sort of like eye-opening to work with the museum experts, and understand a little better that how we can preserve and archive sort of like the material and immaterial game heritage from those days. So let's move on. Enough talk about the history. This is a project that I'm working on, or we're working on also right now. So this is research that has been conducted as part of the multidisciplinary intimacy in data-driven culture project, which is funded by the Strategic Research Council in Finland. And I'm working here closely with my colleagues Heikki Tyni and Taina Myöhänen. And this sort of like project is looking at sort of like understanding the role of data and data analytics for current day game production. Because we know that today game production is sort of like, or has like integrated data-driven methods into its core, like in order to understand player communities, to improve player experience, to sort of like increase retention, or maybe even like cultivate our own development processes. Game studios are using a lot of data, and sometimes they know what they're doing, but apparently, or that's what we learn sometimes, they don't necessarily know, which is really interesting. But anyways, game studios who sort of like operate between platform holders, data analytics companies, and user communities provide a sort of like, to me at least, a sort of like an illustrative case of current day data cultures. So this is something that's very much in progress. Let's see if I can get there. So we're right now working on a couple of papers. I hope you can see it. It's sort of like a little small, but yeah, I'm not going to read it anyways. But yeah, I'll provide the quotes if you need them later on. So you're sort of like one of the first audience to hear the observations. So what we've done is that we've conducted interviews with data analysts and sort of like other game industry professionals who routinely work with game data. And I'll just highlight, today I highlight a handful of sort of like observations, sort of like you get a bit of a quick glimpse of what this work looks like and what we can sort of like highlight from there. And first, as sort of like illustrated by the first quote from one of our informants, instead of providing this sort of like mechanized clarity that the sort of like the data analytics companies are often promising, it seems like data and analytics come across like as a sort of like a messy affair. It's sort of like it's sort of like complicated with the constantly changing distributed platforms, conflicting software services. This is also like what do you do when you got 3 different analytics programs and every single service provides a different result. Once again, you sort of like need to sort of like rely on your experience, rely on the sort of like your skills and probably helps to sort of with others as well. But it's not that we can sort of like just like follow the numbers and then everything comes sort of like super simple. And also like sometimes there is a sort of like the company processes are lacking. Like for example here where we sort of like see that someone's left the building and all of a sudden no one really knows how to run things and what was the original idea. So often it's sort of like nothing specific in terms of preventing these companies from asking the sort of like the right questions, so to speak. But in most cases, the sort of like the more elaborate questions still remain unformulated and unanswered. And one of the key things was the sort of like the chronic lack of time and the sort of like the lack of processes. So let's move on to the second one. One of the things to highlight here is that we need to sort of like be cautious with ideas like raw data, as shown, for example, by Jen Whitson, a Canadian scholar. In order to sort of like make data actionable, so to speak, there are numerous data streams that must be first collected, cleaned, combined, and maybe then sort of like mined for insight. And only then can sort of like potentially the sort of like the design changes be implemented and the game updated. The interview data analysts were well aware of how the sort of like how data can also be sort of like shaped and displayed to make it support almost any kind of argument, as long as sort of like certain parts of existing data are highlighted. What's sort of like happening here. And there were sort of like speculations about like how much this sort of data blending is sometimes used for investor meetings and other high-profile situations. And they were obviously not talking about their own companies, but the other companies always. That they heard that these sort of things happen. We've all heard. So what we can learn from here is that data is always sort of like selected. It's constructed in many different ways. And therefore, sort of like, I guess it's also time for us all to sort of like increase or sort of like improve our data literacy. Maybe we could talk about data analytics literacy, so that we're not sort of like easily fooled here. I have one more. So, while the new analytical tools are often marketed to sort of like guarantee this sort of like rational and calm decision-making processes, the range of emotions professionals attached to game analytics appears to be much broader. So the question is not only about this sort of like sudden changes in everyday processes, but it's more profoundly about the issues connected to sort of like professional identity and the sort of like the usefulness of existing creative abilities. As highlighted in this quote by one of our informants, a seasoned marketing creative, what she's saying is that you know, algorithm can be a terribly ruthless co-worker, and this is sort of like she's sort of like explaining that you present your best ideas, then you test it, and then the algorithm says no. And if your sort of like process is driven by the algorithm, then that's it. Then you get back to the drawing board. Maybe the processes shouldn't be exactly like that. But I mean, like, I'm just saying here that if developers sort of like begin increasingly to perceive metrics and algorithms as this sort of, I don't know, a cage or a trap that sort of like restricts from the beginning the creativity, that is sort of like hard to see any sort of like long-term sustainability for this sort of work. Okay, just like, I think I got like 2 slides and I got like a few minutes. So quickly takeaways from this project. As said, this is very much a work in progress, so I'm just like highlighting a few sort of like semi-random things. We sort of like need to critically analyze the sort of like the data imaginary. So this is the promises often sort of like projected onto data and data analytics, and the sort of like their connection to the sort of like everyday data work, how it's carried on the ground, and the sort of like how these imaginaries are both repeated and questioned in sort of like everyday situations. One of the things, I don't know if I have much time to talk about it here today, but I mean, like just highlighting here is the sort of like the methodological question about access, that how can we make sure that we have the best possible data available. And my experience, based on some of the work we've done with the Finnish game industry in the past decade, is that in a relatively small country, creating trust between scholars and practitioners can actually sometimes be easier than in some other setups. It takes time, no question about it, but in most cases, it's worth it. And I mean, like, you don't need to agree with the developers, but you need to talk with them. Otherwise, you sort of like, yeah, it's hard to sort of like get deeper to too many questions. Sometimes you also end up agreeing with them. That's okay as well. So the sort of like the data-intensive processes can also have an effect on the sort of like the existing power structures. And this is something that's sort of like visible, or sort of like interesting changes happening right now. Sort of like people with data analytics background don't necessarily have background in games. And all of a sudden we have people in sort of like powerful places that do not come from the sort of like the traditional, yeah, I just love games and therefore I wanted to develop games background, which is sort of like changing things, interesting ways. This can sort of like contribute to more diverse understanding of games and of the game industry as such. But it can also sort of like the sort of like trusting too much on data can also sort of like situate individuals into even more exploitative and precarious positions. So we need to be careful. So just some super quick conclusions. First, video games are not produced in a vacuum. They're shaped by various actors, human and non-human, as we've learned. They're dependent on many sort of like contextual factors. So, sort of like accordingly, game industry should not be sort of like perceived as a monolith. Modes of game production vary locally and regionally. It's sort of like important to explore the interplay between the global trends and the sort of like local aspects. And therefore, as I said in the beginning, game production is many things. It should be seen as a plural. Game production studies, this all applies to this, of course, as well. And as, for example, the example of Nokia Engage shows, we need to be aware of the history where we come from, and there we shouldn't focus only on the success stories. Often failures are at least as important and interesting. And I think that sort of like the lessons from IGARA project nicely show that how shaping and maintaining sustainable and diverse working cultures should be a shared goal for academia and the industry. A decade ago, UK scholars David Hesmondals and Sarah Baker posed the question of whether creative labor can be good work as well. And given the sort of like smart datafied nature of creative work? I think this question feels as topical as ever. And then finally, I think we're only sort of like getting started here. If you're right now thinking about like whether you should study something on game production related, my feeling is that this is the perfect time. The industry is, once again, someone might say, you could say this like at any moment, but I mean like right now I feel that it's once again like changing pretty rapidly. It's sort of like we need sort of like well-contextualized studies of the history and culture of game making, but then at the same time we also need to sort of like up-to-date research about like what's going on right now. And there are definitely still many avenues for game production related scholarship to pursue. So, this is my last slide. Yeah, I have to wait for 15 seconds. Thank you. Yes.
Welcome back. Our plenary speaker, CEO and co-founder of NOS, will hold a lecture, Gamers to Science, How to Change the World in Small Steps, in which he will share his story of how he built up several successful collaborations with AAA game developers, and how and why these game developers joined and built small citizen science in the games that revolutionized citizen science.
Thank you for having me. Interestingly, for me, this is the second occasion in a very short period of time that I'm here in Serbia giving a talk at the game industry event, which is in itself really nice that you're interested in what we're doing. Also, I think it tells a nice story about the vivid and developing video game industry scene here in Serbia, something to be really proud of. Today, the message that I want to convey is rather simple and can be summarized quite easily with GG. Meaning that I believe that we must believe in the game. As we spend more and more time in these virtual worlds that are primarily video games, it is inevitable that we believe in good games and we do our best to make games good. Meaning that with this great power that comes from entertaining and engaging millions of people, or billions of people, I should say, primarily comes great responsibility. And among many other things, this great responsibility means to try to extract as much value from this time that we spend in this virtual world as we can. To strive for new creative solutions how to achieve that. And if we're talking about the academia, I think that could translate to being there, making connections, being part of this process, bringing the academic perspective and academic values to the table. Now in this epic quest, we are just a small piece of this huge jigsaw puzzle. We are MMOS, Massively Multiplayer Online Science, and we are a small Swiss company which we created around a very specific core mission, which was to connect video games and gamer communities with citizen science. That is the involvement general public in the research process. And often it manifests in some sort of crowdsourcing of analysis of large databases. Now, when we came up with this idea, I had no contact with the gaming industry whatsoever. I simply felt that it's just too important to let it go. And also, I knew no other such project, so I was pretty sure that nobody, well, maybe somebody has tried it, but nobody managed to pull it off. So I felt that I had to make it happen. And so the first company that I contacted was CCP in Iceland. They're known for creating EVE Online, which is, I think, one of the longest running, massively multiplayer online games. And luckily, they were super receptive to the idea. And after sorting out all the issues around such a project, which were many, in 2016, in March, at around GDC, we launched the first project together that became known as Project Discovery. The first project was a collaboration with the Human Protein Atlas from Sweden. They are providing the coordinating of these mind-blowingly beautiful images. I'm not a biologist, so I was not too familiar with these types of microscopic images. But it tells a lot that when the creative director of CCP, EVE Online, saw them, he hadn't believed that we didn't tamper with the images because they fit so well with the EVE aesthetics as it came out from the research pipeline. And so we created a small mini-game inside EVE Online where we asked players to localize the green staining of these images. Those green stainings are marking the presence of a certain type of protein, and it helps researchers understand the functions of those proteins based on their location. The project became instantly a big success with the player community, and during the 1.5 years that we were running this project, we collected almost 33 million analyses of images inside the game, which is a huge success in citizen science. But what tells even more about how successful it became from day one is this. This is, so the game was, of course, connected with the game's, this mini-game was connected with the game's reward loop. And this was the ultimate reward in Project Discovery. It was called the Sisters of Eve combat suit, a really nice cosmetic outfit for the character. And so CCP game designers made an estimation of roughly how much time it would take to unlock the first one. And they were calculating with something like 3 to 4 weeks for the most active players. The first one was unlocked 17 hours after launch, and the second one shined 6 minutes later. So that's when we already knew that there's something crazy going on. This was the first major scientific publication about the project. It was a really nice milestone. I believe this is the first time where spaceships from a video game were flying through the front page of Nature Biotechnology. In 2017, we switched to research project. We kept the framework of Project Discovery inside the game, but we switched to a new project of analyzing light curves in search for new exoplanets in the data set. That was a collaboration together with the University of Geneva. And we were really happy and humbled that Michel Meyer accepted to be part of the project, so we got an avatar in game. He came to FanFest to give a talk about his work. Now, he is the guy who discovered the first exoplanet and got the Nobel Prize for it 2 years ago in physics. I think the fact that Nobel laureate researchers participated in this project to that extent tells a lot about how substantial their contribution is to science. This photo was taken at FanFest. I really love this one. It was published in Master Inca. On the right, you see Michel Meyer. On the left, that's the space pope. So this guy is almost cosplays as the Amarian religious leader at FanFest. And by the way, in real life, he is an education officer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So it tells a lot of nice stories about different facets of these collaborations. One of the things that we sort of anticipated from the beginning that this would be interesting for journalists, and it worked really well. I think this is one of the benefits that we can bring to game developers. This article was published, I think, the next day when NASA announced the new exoplanet system. And we got dozens of articles published in major journals and papers. I mean, if you know EVE Online, you know that EVE is a crazy game, so it often gets into gaming journals. There's something crazy happening in the game always. But to get an article in the New Yorker, that's not obvious even for EVE. And one of the reasons I think for this success was that the story is relatively easy to understand. Even if you're not playing games or you're not that much into science, you sort of immediately understand that the combination of tools can be something really powerful. And on the other side of the success was that the project was won several really high prestige awards. Like we won the Lovey Award, which I didn't know before they approached us, but it's a Google-backed award that was handed out. Prior to us, it was handed out to the European Space Agency or David Attenborough, and it was really a big thing that they decided that a video game-based project was this merit. We got the Innovation Award from the University of Geneva or the IGDA's Community Leadership Award. In 2020, we switched to a new project. I got an email from Barry Griffin-Boyerson, he's the creative director of CCP, and he was asking, is there anything that we can help? That was during the first wave of COVID, and very quickly, since everything was already in place, all the pipeline and all the technological solutions were in place, in 6 weeks we managed to set up a new project where we took, it was a collaboration between McGill University, BC Cancer, Vancouver, and the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia, who were fighting on the forefront back then. Very quickly we set up a new project in analyzing flow cytometry information. And at this point I want to show you a video. This was a BBC interview, and the reason I like it a lot because most of it is a player telling why they're participating in this.
Like, you look at a prompt and you just draw polygons around data. You can just sit there, pull it up, and start doing it. And I think that was exciting to me, just how approachable it was. And then, I mean, secondly, and probably the more important part is just how relevant it is to me. Like, I can finally relate to this.
It's really just like citizen science community. We had a giant group of people, and we made this one. We gamified this quite a bit. There's incentives for people to do it that'll boost their game experience, but it's also just the heart and soul of our community as well. These are things that our people really enjoy. This really is for the greater good. And that was the strength of this project in particular, where this came out when everybody in the world was at its height of being affected of this.
We're doing two things. Because one, we can, once we have this infrastructure in place, we can help the scientists by accelerating the ability to look at things they know are there. The other thing we do is something they can't do, and that's look at all the possible things that are in the blood. And so what we can do is we can take even people who are not scientists and show them these data sets, and they can detect patterns. They've done a wonderful job in the online game to explain the technology, explain the kinds of things you're looking for, and then we just let them loose on this data. You know, you hear about the COVID research or COVID going on all around the world. A lot of people, like, have
had it or known someone who's had it, and just the fact that I can sit here at my desk while waiting for a fleet, doing something that's going to contribute to, helping find out information about COVID-19, that's just phenomenal that I have this opportunity just playing a video game. And I think that's really kind of what got me into it, is that I can sit at my desk in the comfort of my home and I can help researchers do something, make a difference. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so watching this video was so inspirational for us. In parallel with that, so this was the online story. In parallel with that, back even before we launched the first project with EVE Online, I sat down with Randy Pitchford, who is the president and founder of Gearbox. They're most known for their game Borderlands. And he immediately understood the possibilities and implications of such a project. And so he said that he wants it in one of the games. That was in 2016. We had to wait almost 5 years. 2020 we launched the first collaboration together. But it was really well worth the wait, because we got into Borderlands 3, which was one of the biggest releases of 2019, with a similar minigame. And what happened there is that they created this arcade machine on Sanctuary 3, which is the central space station in Borderlands, where you always go back and sell the loot that you got from the missions. And in this arcade machine, if you go there, inside there is this 8-bit retro style minigame, sort of like Tetris or Candy Crush. But when you're moving the tiles, you're actually manipulating DNA information. And again, to explain that, I'll play you the trailer, because that's much better than what I could probably do.
Hey folks, this is Maya Bial, actor, PhD scientist, researcher, and your favorite person. Today, I'm here to talk to you about video games and science, and how we can grab both by their necks and make them kiss, consensually. Long story short, by playing Borderlands 3, you can contribute to real-world scientific research, as in data that helps real people in need space. Speaking of need, did you know that more than half the cells in our bodies are alien? Only 43% of our cells are of human origin. The rest belong to foreign microbes. These microbes have a massive impact on our body's health. The more we study microbes, the more we can learn about the accumulation of meat and existential terror that is the human body. These microbes are made up of DNA, just like us. Each microbe has its own special DNA signature, and similar species of microbes have similar DNA. If we could sequence all the different species of microbes found in the human body, which, remember, make up more than half of the cells in our body, we'd learn a ton about ourselves. To that end, the Microsetta Initiative collected tens of thousands of samples of, to use the scientific term, doo-doo. Extracted the DNA of the microbes inside and sequenced it. Now we just need to organize this data. Unfortunately, though computers excel at certain tasks like crunching numbers or tracking down specific pornography, they're not so good at organizing DNA information. See, different species of microbes have similar but not quite identical DNA. That means mapping their sequences can be kind of ambiguous. The computer makes lots of small mistakes that can corrupt downstream analysis. Which brings us back to video games! So, we've got several million sequences that are each 150 nucleotides long that are riddled with small errors from the computer analysis. How can we get rid of all these errors? With your help! We've taken the millions of DNA sequences and broken them down into bite-sized puzzles that you can play and solve inside Borderlands 3. And try not to think about the fact that the DNA came from human excrement when I use phrases like bite-sized. By playing Borderlands science inside Borderlands 3, you'll be directly helping our scientists organize and compare this dumb data. The game is simple. You'll be confronted with different strands of DNA, each made up of individual tiles. It's your job to place as many of these tiles as possible in their appropriate row while matching the colors. It's not always possible to line everything up perfectly, but that's okay. By playing the game and matching the sequences, you'll also be identifying the errors in our computer analysis. across the planet build a better algorithm for the future. And since all this research is open access, the entire scientific community will benefit from it. This research could directly lead to a universal catalog of all known microbes, which could lead to new breakthroughs in food, medicine, exercise. The sky's the limit. And it all starts with you playing a video game. But if the pursuit of knowledge isn't enough of an encouragement to sort through virtual butt microbes, then fear not. Playing Borderlands Science earns you in-game currency you can spend on booster items for your characters. Oh, and this is all totally free. Just activate the Borderlands Science machine on Sanctuary 3 and sort some gut microbes.
This trailer also is a good example of what type of benefits these collaborations can bring to science. I mean, creating a trailer like that is out of reach for a classical citizen science project. Whereas here it was, I remember that we just dropped this idea, why don't we talk to my colleague in Big Bang Theory, and she would be perfect personality to represent the two crazy sides of the story. And we thought that it was just a crazy idea, and then 3 weeks later they thought that, okay, we're in talk with her agent and it's probably going to work. So this is something that's out of reach without these partnerships. This project was, well, a milestone project for several reasons. EVE Online is a natural fit to all of this. So for you who know EVE Online, you know that it's a very slow game. There are a lot of space for creating such almost meditative activity where you're playing, waiting for your fleet mates to show up. Also, the EVE community is generally known to be science buffs, so it was easy to sell them a science minigame. Now, if we're talking about Borderlands, that's the mother of all shooter-looters. So when you're out there with your shotgun, you need 150% of your attention to be any good. It's not obvious that such a scientific minigame would survive in such an environment. But they made an amazing job, and it became a big success in Borderlands. And the other interesting thing, while it's sort of a milestone project for us, is that this citizen science project existed before. So it was created by McGill University called Philo. It was actually one of the big successful citizen science projects out there. It looked like this, so it's almost the same game. It was available for a long time online, on the webpage of McGill University, still available. And what happened is we took that original game together with the McGill team, and Gearbox game designers redesigned, fit the aesthetic side of the project, and made some minor modifications to make it more fun. So we have a very good comparison of how this works outside of a game in a classical citizen science setting and inside the video game. The day we released Borderlands Science, that single day, we collected 5 times more data than during the 10 years that researchers were running this project. This is the kind of power that video games can bring to science. And finally, this is a very new project of ours. This is again EVE, the same IP, but a completely different company. It's NetEase in China who is building the mobile version of EVE, which is a completely separated game. And here we're working together with the Ghent University from Belgium and the Life Sciences Lab VIE at the Ghent University to create this new project. This is very fresh, so I don't have too much results for the moment. It's very interesting for us because it's a mobile game as opposed to the previous ones. Now, all these projects are a huge success in citizen science. We managed to engage over 5 million people. We collected over 700 million data analysis from citizen science contributors, which is unprecedented in citizen science. But of course, I think it's worth to mention the challenges that we're facing. So first of all, it's really hard to set up these projects. Developers are not, like game developers are not in a situation where they're hunting for new ideas and new features for their game. Usually it's the other way around. They're super swamped. They have an endless list of things that players want to see in the game. They want to have it fixed. So working on something which is not even part of the core gameplay is a challenge. It's a challenge to justify for the game community. Then of course we have fragmented player communities, meaning that we're not talking to one entity, but we have to convince game developers individually to jump on the board, and sometimes even it's not enough to convince one game developer, but the team who is working on a specific title in the industry. And then on the other side, that's the other bottleneck that we see, we have a lot of interesting research projects in citizen science, really worth the support, very important goals. But simply when we talk to these teams and we look at the data, it's clear that it's never going to make it in video game. I always use this example of a researcher in Britain. She's researching deep sea hydrothermal vents. Very interesting ecosystem down there. Very important to understand how it works. But when I looked at the video, and she has tons of video footage, and she has to segment these images and classify. And when I look at these images, it looked like somebody dumped trash in the bottom of the ocean, because all these instruments are lying around and there are cables and everything. This is never going to fit the aesthetic world of a video game. So we've seen these bottlenecks everywhere, and we started to think about how to solve it. When I cannot say that we're already there, but we have an idea that we're working on, more like a prototype at this point. We're taking out these experiences to a standalone mobile platform, which would be under our control, which would give us more freedom. We wouldn't have to rely on internal in-house game developer resources, which are super painful for video game developers, but we could actually implement these experiences ourselves or with the help of other teams. And also we would be able to decouple the reward cycle, meaning we could reward the player in the mobile for their activity in citizen science, and then we could use those, let's say, in-game currency to exchange for something, a shiny new gun or a new spaceship. And that means that we would be able to host smaller citizen science projects that don't necessarily have a direct connection to industry partners. So this is more or less our story. This is what we're working on, and I'm not sure if a Q&A session was planned. Those things I really like at these conferences, so if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Do you have some statistics on how many the same player plays the game? Like how many times does he came back to play that game in Borderlands?
Yeah, I don't have that off the top of my head. We have that statistic. We know that the engagement, the long-term engagement figures are much healthier than in classical citizen science. And also what's interesting, so there's an article about Zooniverse, quite a well-known article in citizen science about Zooniverse activity. And they have these graphs analyzing the peaks of activity on certain Zooniverse projects, and it's always connected to some media event. When they managed to convince BBC to have an interview with them, then there was a peak in usage. What's amazing in this setup is that we can sort of turn the knobs just a little bit, make sure that it somehow gets the attention of players, and we can keep the activity going. So one of the figures that I know, and I think I can share it because Hilmar shared it with other people, is that when we launched, for example, the second iteration of Project Discovery, the Exoplanet project, I met with Hilmar, who is the CEO of CCP at the game industry event, and I asked him, are you happy with how it's working? And he said that very much so. And even then, which was in September, and we launched it in July, if I remember well, so a couple of months, the initial peak certainly died off. September he said that 10% of the players who log on interact with this feature, which is huge. That's a big thing that it means that it's a major feature of the game. So, yeah, with this answer to your question.
You mentioned that there is certain research that would not fit the aesthetic of a video game.
Yes.
Have you perhaps defined what kind of research would fit the aesthetic of that could be gamified as opposed to the research that goes with it?
Yeah, it actually it points to a deeper question. So I think one of the reasons we managed to pull this whole thing off is because we were sort of a neutral third party, a middleman in this process. I'm not coming from academia. I didn't go to CCP and tell them, guys, I want to find a new exoplanet. What we did is we're trying, and what we're doing right now as well, is we're trying to build a portfolio of research projects. We try to understand what is needed. We try to know about projects where we know that citizen science can help. The best if it's already proven that citizen science can contribute to the research, and where we know that there is a team who believes in this. Because this is a huge commitment. I mean, you'll never get an Nobel Prize for coming to a game industry when they talk to players and be involved in the communication and outreach aspect of it, but it's very important for us. So we are building this portfolio, and then when we find a new opportunity in the game industry, we start an iterative process. And basically the decision is at the game developers, game designers side. They know much better what is their game, how it works, and how their community works. So an example of that would be that I mentioned VIB. Actually with VIB, the lead researcher there is a huge supporter of what we're doing right from the beginning. And for the second iteration of Project Discovery, we wanted to use one of the data sets for a new project, before the exoplanet project, which was data set coming from Aspect. And we went so far as to actually create some more prototypes, play with the data, visualization, and so on. And at a certain point, game designers at CCP said that, sorry guys, it seems that the problem is just too simple for e-players, and they would feel that they would inflate the value of this medium, and they don't want to do that. And so they said that for the researcher that, sorry, and it was really nice because Lennart was the lead researcher, told me that Attila is possible. It's not about our research, it's this whole story is more important than whether it's our project or somebody else's. So he completely right. I think that approach is very important in this process, that the game designers have to find a say in this. Yes?
Could you please give us your comments on pros and cons of developing a separate game for citizen science, for example, something like Folded, and incorporating it as a mini game in established community AAA video game like Borderlands or Evolve. What's your opinion on best cases to use alternative A and alternative B?
So, it might not sound nice, but I would say that developing a standalone citizen science project is next to mission impossible. And it's getting more and more like that. Like 10 years ago when Cancer Research UK created GZ Space, that was the standalone first mobile citizen science app, that was a novelty. So they had a slight chance to get players to play with that, although as a game experience it was nothing really comparable to real game. I think now in 2022, it's almost impossible to get even to that level of engagement. One example that was very successful was Sea Hero Quest. But then if you look into the story deeply, it's more or less almost what we've done with game companies. So the story behind Sea Hero Quest is not just that a couple of enthusiastic researchers teamed up with a small studio and created a small game, but actually what happened is the Deutsche Telekom is corporate responsibility, I guess, or communication department said that, okay, we want to dump a couple of millions on citizen science. Who can we work with? And then they found this university in England where this project, which is a beautiful project, so I'm not questioning the quality of the project, it's a beautiful project. But the success that came, so how they managed to get 3 million installs, if I remember well, was through the backing of Deutsche Telekom, and not necessarily just the money, but also the reach of Deutsche Telekom. So, you know, I would assume I'm not a T-Mobile user, but I would assume that back then all T-Mobile users worldwide got the notification and hey, this is the game and you can help us better understand dimension. That was how they became successful. Other than that, it's really hard to find new examples that managed to get noticed even. So that's why I think it's an impossible market. And that was our core idea to work, well, on one side, to ask the game developers to help with their decades-long experience of how to make something which is really fun, but also to give access to communities of millions and tens of millions. That's the biggest challenge, I think. Thank you.
Due to the technical reasons, roundtable session will be held a bit earlier than planned. So I kindly ask the participants of the roundtable to go on the first floor and join the session now.
Ajde idem ja gore pa. Online svi.
Hello, everyone. Encouraging
start. Thanks a lot. I will try to explain how the future happens. And I will briefly make an introduction why should we care. Then I will also briefly touch upon strategic foresight as applied methodology, but not go into details, just to illustrate a few points. I will not give too much details, that's not the point of the exercise. Then I will try to map the path that Nintendo went through after the Second World War, and although I will speak about the future, I will not mention anything after 1980 to be able to illustrate some points, how the future happens, how it emerges. And hopefully it will be inspirational for your activities here. So first of all, why should we care about the future? We can have different notions about it. When does it start? Does it start like in 5 seconds or tomorrow? In 10 years. And usually in lectures and meetings that I have, one of the first things to say is that we can say the future starts when things are significantly different than they are today. So depending on the issue or the happenings around us, it can be, hopefully not, but it can be tomorrow if there is some huge wild card happens, some huge crisis emerges. But also it can be 10 years from now because that's the time period that is needed for things to substantially change. But also we have to have in mind that things are changing more rapidly. For example, it took 3.5 years for Netflix to gain 1 million users. It took Twitter 2 years. It took Instagram around 3 months. And it took 5 days for ChatGPT to get 1 million users in the last few weeks or days. So things are happening faster and faster. So sometimes the future comes faster than we usually say that, generally speaking, on the level of societies and humanities or countries or large businesses or areas of expertise like video game studies or some other academic field, it takes time for things to substantially change from the situation in which we are today. And that notion that the future is unknown, that it will happen, we are not sure when, but we can say that there are risks and opportunities attached to it. But I will now focus on the risks. And there is a notion of a number of long-term problems that are very serious that we as a humanity face right now. And global systemic risk is a field of study as well. As foresight is. They are not the same, but they are connected. This field looks into likelihood of serious deterioration in human-created social systems. And as you see, these are serious issues. Also, if we do not emphasize the part of the risks, if we look into demographic changes, or climate changes, or technological developments over decades and centuries, we can call them macro trends, or mega trends, or drivers of change. So one key element of the strategic foresight as a field, theoretical or applied, is that the future happens when key drivers, like demographic changes, technological changes, changes in values, politics, when they substantially change in the way that they respond to human basic needs. To feel safe, to feel connected, to have a sense of personal achievement, love, etc. Including the need for variety or how to have fun. So that's how the future happens. Key drivers are changing the environment, and then they interfere with our basic human needs, and somebody with a new product, with a new service, with a new policy, with a new idea, with a new value or art, responds to that tension and creates something new. is, does anybody know which word? Perma-crisis. Continuous crisis. So the notion is that the volatile environment in which we all operate, as personal human beings, family members or members of society or our businesses, is dramatically and increasingly being changed with those separate elements coming together and creating more change, problems, risks, opportunities for somebody, than if they would develop on their own separately. And unfortunately, the word for 2022 is perma-crisis. So I wanted to say that this is the reason why people look into the future. I will say how and since when, and why should you care. But also to say that businesses are faced with increasingly hostile, changing environment than ever before. And if we will look 60 years ago, and if we would look into top 500 companies, on the Standards & Poor's list, the average lifespan of those 500 top companies was around 60 years, 60 years ago. And it is projected that in 2030, it will be only 14.4 years. Average lifespan of the top 500 companies. That means that 75% of currently largest companies will disappear by that age, by that time. Also, we have some, old companies in the list, like General Electric, ExxonMobil, Procter & Gamble. They are old companies, but still, the most valuable companies currently in the market are Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, new players. But this shows that we will have new players very soon. So, logically, and particularly after this perma-crisis induced by corona pandemic, Ukrainian crisis, energy crisis, climate changes, forced migrations, rising inflation, disruption of global logistic channels, problems with the food supply, it's logical to conclude that also, apart from governments, the businesses are looking how to prepare themselves to be more resilient and to survive. And some companies do survive. Some companies do survive. For example, a recent report, it was made by the Bank of Korea, found out that they looked into the oldest companies in 41 countries. And 56% of them were companies from Japan. Oldest companies in the world. And also another research shows that in Japan, there were 33,000 businesses older than 1 century. And it's linked with family ownership. I will not go in detail to that, but it's linked with family ownership, with generations after generation, like 17, 25, 50 generations running the same business that has some core competency. Some core competency, family ownership seems to be among the key issues for longevity of the businesses. And these are some of the oldest hotel and the oldest candy store, etc. So, what does it mean to look into the future, to exercise strategic foresight, to deal with long-term changes? It means to practice an activity that was developed over years. Usually, this is the main focus of my inputs, but I will shorten. And sorry, it's going to remain slightly abstract, but not to lose too much time and to be able to focus on Nintendo later. So, the field first was mentioned by H.G. Wells, science fiction writer, Time Machine, War of the Worlds, who was a publicly active intellectual, advocating that apart from professors of history, we need professors of foresight. He was one of the first to explicitly advocate for that. And it was, among other things, the consequence of the new emerging technology, electrical energy, that was horizontally changing everything, every field of industry and life. Then we had another wave of changes around the Second World War, where technological developments were linked directly with existential risks. Of course, I'm talking about the nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, and the usage of the nuclear weapon. And at that time, Rand Corporation in the United States and one figure, Herman Kahn, they developed narrative descriptions of how the future might unfold if we or they use weapons in this or that scale, etc. And by the way, he was living in California. He was neighbor with people from Hollywood, with Stanley Kubrick, and those neighbors and friends proposed to him to put a label on those narrative stories and to call them scenarios. So scenarios are one tool of the foresight that is linked with the beginnings of the field. And they emerged from, security studies and security dilemmas into business in the 1970s. Back then, it was relatively, let's say, simple to run an oil company, Demand grew annually 7%. There was a continuous supply. So to plan strategically for the oil company was to plan when to build a new refinery or how many tankers to buy next year. And the Shell was the only one that engaged in foresight and scenario development. And they were the one to engage into finding key drivers for their own interest and to put 2 by 2 scenario metrics to see what would happen if this or that happens. And that was, for example, exactly what happened in 1972 when there was an oil crisis after the Yom Kippur War. And they were ready. They recognized that one of their scenarios started to emerge. By the way, they said, what if, and that's the question that is linked to futurist thinking, what if, and then you say something that is substantially different than from today. They said, what if the barrel oil price is 5 times higher than today? And why would you, imagine that something will just rise in prices 5 times? And actually what happened was that prices rose 7 times. But they were ready, and they become the Shell company they are today. Later, there was further development, and since the beginning of this century, companies are trying to link continuous scanning for emerging futures with their mid-term planning. And it's not easy, but people do that. And they use a variety of methods and tools and illustrations to be able to think about the future. It's not easy. And there are psychological studies. What does it mean to think about the future, how the brain behaves? It's interesting, but not a story. But it helps if you have images. This is the image of the futurist cone. In the center, you see the projected future. This is how things will look like if these trends continue. And they never continue. But still, we think about default future. This is what is written in the government strategies. We will build this, do that, in the next 3 years. The companies also have projections. Or you have your own visions, In 3 years I will finish this. This is your projected future, default, baseline. In geopolitics, it can mean something else. In 3 years, you will align with our key and over 7 chapters. By that time, you will become the member of the European Union. Somehow it doesn't happen, So not by themselves, by chance, think wide enough to cover possible, plausible, probable, preferable futures and to actually work toward them. And this is what the field is all about, to think about possibilities and to be ready for them, to describe some of them into scenarios, to look for emerging signals of the future, and to see whether something is unfolding that you described. So, in that case, in 1970s, the people in Shell, they didn't know when will it happen, but they knew what to do if and when that happens. They were ready. There was no strategic surprise for them at that moment. And the second image is the futurist triangle. It also helps to think about the future in these terms and corners of the triangle. The push of the present are those trends that exist, demographic changes, technological changes, culture, political processes that you can see right now. Be aware what you can see right now, it is what happened in the past. Every trend, analysis, conclusions, they are based on data. All data is about the past. There is no data about the future. Any data that you have is only and always about the past. And every trend that you can describe right now is already something from the past. It's not enough. But if you know what your focal issue is, if you know what you want to analyze, the future of video games, the future of academic discipline, this and that, the future of management, the future of human resources development, the future of this or that, if you have a focal issue, you can see, okay, let's see what is happening in the world with the aging population, with the Web3 development, with metaverse emerging, etc. What does it mean for my idea, my focal issue? Then you go up, that's the pool of the future. That's the power of the images of the future. You need to be able to visualize what you want to achieve. We can't be what we can't see. We can't be what we can't see. That was the question that was first posed dramatically after the Second World War. There were conferences on disarmament. And people were talking that we need disarmament because we want future without war. And one of the early futurists, Ellen Golding, she was a sociologist, she asked, how does that future look? How the world without weapons and wars looks like? You know what you don't want. You don't want war. What do you want? Nobody had an answer. Nobody had a vision or image of that future, the picture, you know, that you can relate to, that has a smell and sound, that is tactile, that you can think that you can live in that future sometimes, in some time in the future. So you need to be able to project possible futures, to pinpoint your preferable, to put it on the upper corner of the futurist triangle, to see which trends can help you to go there. But the third corner is the weight of the history. Those are structures. So the futurist thinking is about agency versus structures. The structures are social, political, technological, economical, political structures. And invested interests, power, where the power lies, and money. And what do they want? That is preventing you from achieving your desired future. Usually I go into more details, but we will judge this. This is more important. So when futurists are looking for, as I said, trends are about the past, and it's called environmental scanning. Social, technological, economical, environmental, political structures in the world. As we know them today, because we have data. We don't have the data about the future yet, but we can use so-called S-curve, which is a tool designed by one of the futurists, Graham Molitor. It's not important. But this is the usual archetypical path for something new. It doesn't necessarily need to be technology. But the point is that you can find in the lower corner pockets of the that is not yet mainstream, that is still in a laboratory, that is still discussed only at the conference for the video game studies. Somebody will mention something here. Maybe it will end up in some later, in some specialized magazine. You know, you will issue some paper about your scientific work. Only a few people will know about it. Later, if it continues to develop, it will reach, you know, general media, still as a novelty, something new, but it will reach mainstream media. And only later, when it matures, the idea, the problem, the possibility, new product, new artistic style, whatever, only when it reaches, you know, governments, meaning we need to regulate this, we need to regulate artificial intelligence, we need to regulate this or that. That means that it reached some level of maturity. And there is a word there, third horizon, and I will explain it now. So, one of the tools that I will use to analyze the path that Nintendo went through is so-called three horizons method. The first horizon, this is the current way of the world. This is how the business is done today. This is where the power is. We have data about it, the infrastructure is built about it. This is business as usual. There is the blue line, is somebody who is challenging that, and we usually link that with entrepreneurial mindset. Horizon 1 thinks that business is risky, but entrepreneurial, we say, yeah, it's risky, but I will try to do it. And if he is successful, in, let's say, 2 to 5 years, the blue horizon will rise, it will become maybe new normal, new business as usual. Maybe it will take 10 years. And we can, as I said, if you look into Netflix or Amazon or Facebook, how many years took them to, you know, for example, Facebook, I think from the first user to 1 billion daily users, it took 10 years. No. So you can think about the blue horizon reaching top in, let's say, 10 years. But now, we could be able to spot something really new, really revolutionary. That's the third horizon that will become the future in maybe 20, 30 years. And it's difficult. But, you know, somebody has to do it. And how to do it? That area between all the lines, the green, the red and blue line, is the area for experimentation, for portfolio management, for experiments, pilots, for new partnerships, for something new. And I think that was exactly what Nintendo did after the Second World War. They started in 1989. They were a manufacturer of, you know, paper cards for game. Hanafuda cards. You know, they were like illustrated cards with birds and flowers. Even Yakuza used them for gambling. They were popular. And they were, Nintendo used to exist in parallel for decades with Ottoman Empire. If somebody would ask you in 1905, you have one of the largest empires in the world, and a paper card production factory in feudal Japan, who will survive? You know, what will you answer? You will not answer, you know, paper production company in rural Japan. But something happened. What happened, and I will try to elaborate in the next 5-10 minutes, how it happened, was that core competency of Nintendo, how to have fun, how to create fun, resonated with social, technological, economical, and political changes in the world and in Japan after the Second World War. To perhaps you know, Mario knows for sure. You know, when the founder of Nintendo died in 1940, his great-grandson Hiroshi, he was 22 at the time, he took over the company. So in 1949, he took over the company. And he remained there at the helm of Nintendo for the next 50 years. And among other things, he tried various businesses in the next decade or two. He established a taxi company. He was an interesting character. He invested in the love hotels. The love hotel is a hotel that you can rent a room per hour. And he was frequently visited. Nintendo tried a lot to go into the food industry. But somehow they managed to recognize that they are an entertainment business, that their core competence is how to have fun, and they obviously thought about it, what does it mean to have fun in the new world? And that period of experimentation is what I think happened in this central part. We tried a lot of things to see what works. Of course, he was able to do that because they introduced a first technological intervention. They started to produce plastic cards. And everybody said they're crazy. They will last longer. The paper goes out fast and then you can sell more. No, but he wanted to use new technology back then. Plastics. He made plastic cards and had enough money to be able to go into other businesses, to develop a portfolio, to look for opportunities in emerging markets or emerging human needs, or how new technology, social developments interlink with human needs, to have fun, to have a variety. So I said that I will go after the year 1980 because when they recognized that their core competency is fun, they went into toys, then electric toys, electric guns, then into arcade and Donkey Kong. With the major innovation being story-like game. And of course I don't need to talk about that to you, but I'm just saying, back then it was a new thing. To play with stories. And I think that's very relevant. Because you need to learn how to ride the emerging waves of social, technological, economic, and political changes. So what exactly I think happened? After the Second World War, Japan suffered a defeat. They were occupied by American forces. And in the first period, the focus was on changing the social, economical order and toward economical reconstruction. There was direct, top to bottom, foreign leadership. Somebody telling them what to do. And it lasted for about 10 years, until, let's say, 1955. In that period, they had land reform, they reorganized labor unions, they abolished all hierarchical, family, tribal, clan-like structures, and supported nuclear family, basic family. They supported, Americans brought those ideas, gender equality, workers start to emerge more and more. I said, a lot of changes happened. And then, in the second period, after 1955, technological changes started. Mass communication started in Japan. Television took over. By the 1960s, people in Japan were, on average, spending 1 hour more watching television than people in the United States. A new culture emerged. So after the war, when there was a defeat, humiliation, changes in the way that people live. For example, there was a lack of good alcohol. And they started to make alcohol from anything that they had at hand, including toxic things and The name for that alcohol was Kasutori, which became the name for the culture, hedonistic culture that engaged into new, let's say, immoral side of urban living with disillusioned people after the war, after the Croatian, love hotels, prostitution, but also generational differences between generation of people who are establishing now families that remember the Second World War, and they wanted something new for themselves. And in those waves, somebody in Nintendo realized that things have to change. So he went to the United States. He made an arrangement with Disney to print Disney characters on their cards. By the way, not only that, he tried with seasoning, Disney seasoning for rice noodles. It sounds stupid and it didn't work, but he tried that. He tried a lot of things. So he was not lucky, he was inventing, trying and pushing, trying to see what will emerge. And what emerged was following. There was a new culture in which you don't anymore want to have fun, with alcohol or prostitution or something else. You want to have fun with your kids, with your family. You have television in every home. You have arcades, and you were into electronic toys than electronic games. You have storytelling in 1980. And then you decided to make a home device to play at your home, on your television, with your children. So the substantial difference was in answering the question, who has the right to have fun? Kids, young people, adults as well. So today, if you look today, trends from the 2020, one of the trends is that adult fun. You can buy yourself a new PlayStation or whatever, even if you are 45. It's normal, it's logical, it's needed. Or if you are a serious investor, you invest in the gaming, for example. It's important. But it became important because it resonated with the changes in the environment. New technological development, mass communication, spending time at home, spending time in front of the television with kids, then having fun with them, utilizing those resources, and using narratives. So my final point is, what was that narrative? How it all came together? What was, below the surface? What was the emotion or myth or metaphor for this? It was social upward mobility. I can become something. And the changes in the social upward mobility in Japan in this period were larger than ever. They have a flat social structure now. They do not have huge inequality. And in games, you start as a beginner. You are coming over obstacles. You can have a hero's journey. Anyhow, you move upwards in multiplayer environment. You want to earn respect from your peers. You move upwards. Upward movement. It's an American dream. It's also a Japanese dream. And it resonates with their culture. So when you move, and that's the last minute of my presentation, when you move from age 1, you do not only think what will new emerge, you also think what do you want to preserve from the past, what legacy you want to survive. And that legacy, for the people in the United States, but also in Japan, is that hard work, willpower, stubbornness can bring you far in social level. Work hard, have willpower, Be the hero of your own journey. And I think this is how the future happened in this area. Thank you very much. Of course, any questions, I am at disposal.
We are way behind the schedule, okay, so we have to move on between sessions. Thank you, Rajan. Now I kindly ask all the participants to check the schedule your sessions. We also ask the students and the other attendees to pick the session you want to follow. On the projector you can see where each of the session is held. Because this is not, we didn't put it in the proper order. So, okay, video games from the inside